7:15 hours, Tuesday, September 12, 1978. Suburban cul-de-sac, Midwestern United States. The morning began under a muted gray sky. A light drizzle had left the pavement glistening, reflecting the diffuse glow of dawn, each droplet refracting the soft, early light. The street was quiet, empty of human activity, except for the occasional distant hum of a delivery truck. Cars were rare, leaving the silence punctuated only by the faint rustle of wind through early autumn leaves. The babysitter, a 23-year-old recent college graduate, approached the house carrying a satchel containing children's books, a small lunchbox, and a personal notebook. She had been employed by the family for 3 months, and her observations that morning were routine, though something small, almost imperceptible, would later prove significant. The house itself was unremarkable in design. A 2-story brick structure with shuttered windows, a narrow driveway leading to a detached garage, and a manicured lawn damp from the overnight rain. A small lion statue, weathered but maintained, rested near the corner of the front yard. She noted the position of the statue without conscious thought, recording its condition in her mental log. Precision mattered. She had developed a habit of documenting minor details of the environment, from door positions to window blinds, the folding of newspapers, and the exact order of furniture placement. These habits had begun as methods for childcare efficiency, but over time they created a comprehensive record of household life. At exactly 7:16, the mother appeared at the front door. She was wearing a tailored overcoat and carrying a briefcase. In her free hand, she held a plain brown envelope. Without a word of greeting beyond a brief nod, she approached the lion statue and slid the envelope into a small crevice. The movement was precise, deliberate, practiced. Seconds later, the father appeared, carrying his briefcase. He paused briefly at the curb, glanced toward the street, then departed, leaving the house silent and still. Both cars were gone within 90 seconds. The street remained empty, except for the faint hum of the distant delivery truck and the subtle drip of water from roof gutters. The babysitter's morning routine began immediately. She removed her coat and laid out her supplies, checking the play area for safety hazards. Breakfast was prepared at 7:30 with attention to exact portions, cereal measured with care, juice poured without spilling, utensils aligned. She cataloged minor details in her notebook: the angle of the sun through the blinds, the pattern of reflections on polished floors, the sound of the child's blocks clinking together. These details were seemingly mundane, but they created a pattern of awareness that, in retrospect, would allow her to detect irregularities. As she carried out these tasks, she noted small anomalies. The neighbor's cat, for instance, wandered onto the driveway for exactly 6 minutes, then retreated. The morning newspaper arrived at 7:22, sliding neatly through the slot. These minor occurrences were logged in her notebook alongside childcare tasks. She did not yet assign them significance. Observation was methodical, habitual, almost ritualistic. At this stage, no suspicion existed. Her mental state was one of diligent attention rather than concern. By 8 o'clock, the child was engaged in play on the carpet, constructing small towers of blocks. The babysitter conducted a routine check of the house, walking through rooms and noting minor adjustments in furniture placement. It was during this period that a subtle irregularity occurred. The father returned briefly, retrieved a small package from the lion statue, and carried it inside without acknowledgement. On its own, this would have seemed inconsequential. Yet within the broader context of repeated morning departures, it created a micro-pattern, behavior precise in timing and execution, suggesting deliberate coordination. From 8:15 onward, the household followed a predictable rhythm. The child's activities were timed to the minute: snack at 8:30, book reading at 9 o'clock, short walk in the backyard at 9:15. The babysitter's peripheral awareness remained high. She recorded minor movements of objects: a misplaced toy, a slight adjustment in a window blind, or the subtle change in light patterns across the floors. These notes were all time-stamped, forming a ledger that captured the totality of household activity. The attention to detail, methodical and silent, became a form of observation that mirrored investigative procedures, even if the babysitter did not yet recognize it as such. At 9:45, the first anomaly of note occurred. A sedan appeared on the street across from the house and remained parked for 13 minutes before leaving. She recorded the make, model, and license plate number. The vehicle's presence was unusual, but not alarming. Observation at this stage was purely factual. By 10:05, the family had resumed standard routines: breakfast dishes cleared, laundry folded, mail organized. The juxtaposition of ordinary activity and external irregularity created a tension, though it remained largely subconscious. The early afternoon maintained the same rhythm. The babysitter took the child for a walk to the nearby park at 13:15. The walk was precise, 25 minutes each direction, monitoring minor environmental details along the route. Trees bore minor damage from previous foot traffic, leaves were displaced in consistent patterns, fire hydrants showed signs of recent paint. Each observation was logged. In the absence of apparent threat, the activity served as routine documentation. Patterns of neighborhood movement were mapped in her notebook: pedestrian routes, vehicle circulation, and incidental contacts. Returning at 14:05, she noted further anomalies. The neighbor's sedan had returned and remained parked for 2 consecutive days, unusual for the otherwise empty street. Packages that had been placed in the Garden Lion or mailbox earlier in the day had shifted subtly. She recorded all events with precise timestamps: 14:07, sedan parked; 14:10, package repositioned. At this stage, the anomalies remained contextually isolated. Observation was habitual rather than investigatory. The babysitter remained focused on childcare tasks, yet her log accumulated increasingly precise records of micro-events. Evening routines commenced at 1600 hours. The parents returned from work in staggered intervals. The mother removed a single envelope from a mailbox, placing it in an interior coat pocket. The father carried a small, nondescript parcel. Movements were deliberate, measured, and synchronized. The babysitter recorded each event without commentary, following procedural documentation standards. No assumptions were made, all entries were factual. Her notebook by 2000 hours contained over 50 discrete observations, cataloging movement, timing, and minor behavioral details. As the household settled for the night, the child prepared for bed. Lights were dimmed at 2000 hours, books aligned for the following day, and the babysitter reviewed her observations. Individually, events appeared routine. Collectively, they formed a lattice of regular behavior interrupted by precise, repeated anomalies. The cumulative effect, unnoticed at the time, established the basis for subsequent suspicion. Even as the street emptied and quiet descended, the patterns observed hinted at coordination beyond ordinary domestic life. The slow-burn tension in these observations derived not from confrontation or drama, but from accumulation. Small, deliberate actions, minor deviations in timing, and repeated patterns created an investigative footprint. The babysitter, through ordinary diligence, began recording the precursors of intelligence activity. Without knowing it, her methodical observation mirrored early reconnaissance techniques, documenting micropatterns, establishing baseline behaviors, and noting deviations. The ordinary cadence of a suburban household, filtered through meticulous observation, became the foundation for a procedural uncovering of covert activity. By 20:30 hours, the babysitter departed. Her logbook contained the full measure of the day: timestamps, detailed notes on objects, precise recording of microactions, and minor environmental observations. No immediate conclusions were drawn. Yet within these entries lay the seed of recognition: subtle anomalies, repeated patterns, and a framework for comparison over time. The ordinary had intersected with the extraordinary, though invisibly. It was here, in the quiet domestic routine, that suspicion would take root and investigative observation, almost incidentally, began. 7:05 hours, Thursday, September 21st, 1978. Suburban Street, same residence. By the second week of observation, the babysitter's awareness of the household's patterns had deepened. The minor anomalies of the prior days, once fleeting and easily dismissible, began to coalesce into a recognizable rhythm. Her logbook, initially intended to track meal schedules, playtimes, and general household activity, now contained a growing catalog of irregularities. She noted them with careful timestamps, precise descriptions, and spatial detail. Each observation was recorded in neutral language, factual rather than interpretive, following a procedure she had unconsciously developed: time, location, action, context. The morning began as usual. At 7:07, the mother exited the house carrying a briefcase and a plain brown envelope. At 7:09, she approached the Garden Lion and deposited the envelope in the hollowed crevice. Unlike the first observation, the babysitter now recorded the angle of the envelope's insertion, the slight hesitation of the hand, and the position of the mother's feet in relation to nearby paving stones. By 7:11, the father had emerged, briefcase in hand, and departed along a slightly different route than the previous week. These small variations, logged carefully, suggested deliberate coordination rather than randomness. During breakfast, the babysitter noted further irregularities. The newspaper had arrived at 7:22, but its pages contained markings she had not seen before, a pencil line along the edges, subtle fold discrepancies that suggested intentional handling. She recorded the color of ink, the orientation of folds, and the exact positioning relative to the kitchen counter. While these details were minor, her methodical observation created a baseline for detecting anomalies over time. The cumulative effect was clear. Patterns existed beyond ordinary domestic routine, and their repetitions suggested a purpose. By 8:15, the child was engaged in play, and the babysitter began a more structured approach to monitoring the household. She adopted fixed observation points, a corner of the living room with a clear view of the hallway, the kitchen window overlooking the driveway, and the small landing near the garden line. From these vantage points, she recorded movements with exact times, durations, and spatial relationships. A pattern emerged, packages moved, envelopes shifted, and briefcases appeared and disappeared with precise timing. Each entry in her logbook was cross-referenced against prior days, revealing incremental but consistent deviations from ordinary household behavior. The most significant escalation occurred during a mid-morning observation on Thursday, September 21st. At 9:03, a car appeared on the street across from the house, parked for 11 minutes. The babysitter noted the make and license plate. Within the same interval, the mother made a brief telephone call, lasting precisely 2 minutes and 17 seconds. The timing of the call, combined with the car's presence, suggested a correlation rather than coincidence. The babysitter logged both events, noting direction of gaze, hand placement, and any observable signals, however slight. Her entries were neutral, procedural, and devoid of interpretation, yet collectively they indicated a potential pattern of coordinated behavior. By mid-afternoon, the babysitter had initiated passive surveillance beyond the house. At 13:15, she walked the child to the nearby park, tracking the same route previously observed. Along the path, she noted two unusual occurrences: a brief stop by a gray sedan at the far end of the street, lasting exactly 7 minutes, and a pedestrian with a bulky coat lingering near the intersection at 13:22. Both were minor in isolation, yet recorded against the household's internal movements, they formed a temporal correlation worthy of notation. She marked the precise time, duration, and location of each anomaly, adding sketches of vehicle placement and pedestrian positions in the margin of her logbook. Returning at 14:05, she observed another irregularity. The father, previously absent for part of the morning, retrieved a small package from the garden line. The package had been rotated slightly from its original orientation. She documented the movement, the sequence of his steps, and the placement of his briefcase relative to the front door. Over the next hour, she noted repeated microactions, adjusting blinds at 14:12, moving a mailbag at 14:17, and opening the front door only partially at 14:20 before returning inside. Each movement was recorded meticulously, time-stamped to the second. Suspicion began to emerge not from single event, but from accumulation. Patterns of behavior, minor in isolation, suggested a deliberate operational rhythm. Envelopes, packages, and signals were not random. Their timing and placement implied coordination with an unseen actor. The babysitter, initially engaged in passive observation, recognized the value of continuity, recording repeated actions, noting deviations, and maintaining a clear sequence of events. Her approach mirrored early intelligence tradecraft, though she was unaware of its formal terminology. Observation became systematic. She plotted routes, tracked vehicle movements, and mapped likely positions for potential exchanges. By 1600 hours, the evening routine reinforced the emerging pattern. The mother returned, briefcase in hand, and paused at the mailbox, removing a single envelope and placing it in her coat. The father arrived minutes later, carrying a small parcel. Their movements were deliberate, coordinated, and repeated daily. The babysitter noted each event in precise language: time, position, object, action. She began to hypothesize, cautiously and without presumption, that these actions might represent a form of information exchange. No direct evidence yet existed, but the consistency of behavior suggested an underlying operational purpose. In response to growing awareness, she adapted her methodology. Observation points were rotated to cover multiple angles. All entries in the logbook included environmental context, duration, and sequence. She began noting the presence of unknown individuals or vehicles within a 3-block radius, recording license plates, vehicle makes, and approximate times of appearance. Micro-events such as the adjustment of a window blind or subtle repositioning of a lawn ornament were logged as potential signals or markers. The babysitter's role shifted subtly from passive caretaker to meticulous observer of behavioral micropatterns. As days progressed, patterns solidified. Every Thursday at 7:16, the brown envelope was placed in the lion statue. At 7:22, the newspaper was delivered. At 8:03, the father retrieved the package. External occurrences mirrored internal household behavior. Cars appeared at precise intervals, pedestrians lingered for exact durations, and phone calls of consistent length coincided with these external presences. The babysitter's logbook now contained entries for 32 distinct anomalies over a 10-day period. Each anomaly was cataloged with exact times, durations, and spatial coordinates. By 1800 hours, the household's evening routine reflected a semblance of normalcy. Dinner was served, dishes cleared, and the child prepared for bed. Yet the babysitter's cumulative observations had transformed ordinary domestic life into a ledger of coordinated action. Each entry, meticulously recorded, reflected sequences of behavior that suggested a structured operational pattern. Suspicion, subtle at first, became a quiet, persistent awareness. The household was no longer simply a family to care for. It was a locus of repeated, precise, and unexplained activity, meriting further documentation. The slow-burn tension during this period lay not in dramatic events, but in the accumulation of small, deliberate behaviors. Patterns emerged from repetition, minor adjustments, precise timing, coordinated movements. The babysitter's diligence, maintaining timestamps, spatial records, and environmental context, mirrored procedural intelligence observation. Her role, initially peripheral, had evolved into a critical observational node. The household's ordinary exterior concealed a lattice of behaviors that, if recognized collectively, suggested covert activity beyond the visible domain. By 2030, the babysitter concluded her day. The logbook contained 59 new entries, each recorded in neutral, precise language. The day's observations reinforced the emerging hypothesis. The parents' movements were coordinated, deliberate, and likely connected to an external, unseen handler. While no concrete evidence existed at this stage, the accumulation of anomalies, time packages, consistent external vehicles, recurring pedestrian appearances provided a procedural foundation for further investigation. The subtle tension, derived from observation rather than confrontation, set the stage for escalation, the transition from suspicion to formal inquiry. Even as the street emptied, lights dimmed, and the child slept, the babysitter's awareness of irregularity persisted. Each minor action, recorded with methodical care, contributed to a developing intelligence mosaic. The ordinary rhythm of domestic life now contained embedded anomalies, a sequence of micro-events that suggested coordination and purpose. The slow, cumulative recognition of these patterns would eventually draw federal attention, but at this stage, the babysitter's role was observational, precise, and procedural, a civilian unknowingly performing the initial stages of reconnaissance. At 14:37 hours on Wednesday, October 4, 1978, during a routine backyard retrieval of toys, the babysitter discovered an envelope partially concealed beneath a loose brick near the garden lion. The envelope, small and unmarked, contained folded papers with what appeared to be coded writing, the ink slightly smudged along one edge. She documented the discovery in her notebook immediately, noting the exact location relative to the lion statue, the orientation of the envelope, and the surrounding environmental details, including the damp condition of the brick and the scattered leaves from the overnight wind. She did not open the contents further, understanding that tampering could compromise the evidentiary value, and instead photographed the envelope in situ and recorded the sequence of events, time-stamping the observation to the second. The babysitter maintained her procedural approach, recording the precise steps leading to the discovery. 14:32 child playing near flowerbed, 14:35 bricks shifted, 14:37 envelope observed. The irregularity of the envelope, when compared to prior logs of microanomalies such as package rotation, newspaper markings, and repeated vehicle arrivals, suggested a deliberate pattern of communication or exchange. Following the discovery, She secured the immediate area, ensuring that no one in the household was present or aware of her observations, and prepared a detailed report for potential authorities, including sketches of the envelope's placement, orientation, and possible escape routes for external actors. At 15:05 hours, she contacted the local FBI field office via telephone, providing a factual account of the observation, noting her employment as the household babysitter, and detailing her previous logbook entries without interpretation, maintaining a strictly neutral tone. She delivered the timeline of observed anomalies beginning with September 12th and continuing through the daily patterns she had documented, including package movements, timed phone calls, repeated vehicle appearances, and pedestrian behavior near the residence. The FBI agent on the line requested immediate documentation, instructing her to preserve the envelope and any related items exactly as found, and to continue her observation without intervening directly with the household's activities. She complied, logging each new event while maintaining her daily childcare routine, effectively serving as a civilian surveillance asset. Between 15:30 and 1700 hours, she noted additional activity, including the mother retrieving mail at 16:12, placing an item into the interior coat pocket, the father carrying a briefcase to a waiting vehicle at 16:19, and a previously unobserved third vehicle parked across the street for 7 minutes at 16:22. Each observation was recorded with precise timestamps, spatial coordinates, and object descriptions. The FBI subsequently dispatched a counterintelligence officer to meet the babysitter at the residence on October 5th at 9 o'clock hours. The meeting followed strict procedural guidelines. The babysitter presented her logbook, photographs, sketches, and prior notes detailing daily routines, environmental anomalies, and repeated behaviors, all cross-referenced to specific dates and times. The officer examined each entry, verifying consistency and completeness, and instructed her to continue recording observations in real time while avoiding any interference with household operations. Beginning October 6th, federal involvement expanded to include monitoring of the street adjacent to the residence. Surveillance units recorded vehicles, noting makes, models, license plates, and durations of parking in correlation with household activity. The babysitter contributed real-time information, confirming arrival and departure times of vehicles observed previously in her logs, including repeated occurrences of a gray sedan at 13:15 hours and a dark green pickup at 16:22 hours. At 14:12 hours on October 6th, the babysitter documented the mother removing a small envelope from the lion statue, carrying it inside, and placing it atop a stack of mail without opening it. The father retrieved a parcel at 14:17, rotated its orientation, and replaced it in a secure, interior location. The babysitter noted microactions such as hand positioning, step sequencing, and minor adjustments to window blinds, considering them potentially relevant to signaling or operational protocols. By October 7th, the FBI had requested that the babysitter record additional context, including environmental variables such as weather, lighting, pedestrian movement, and any unusual sounds or odors, all of which were incorporated into her procedural logs. At 10:05 hours, she observed an individual in a long coat lingering on the sidewalk approximately 3 blocks away from the residence, observing the household without direct interaction. She noted direction of gaze, approximate age, estimated height, and duration of observation, recording the event in her notebook and including a rough sketch for orientation. Federal agents used these observations to corroborate intermittent street surveillance data, establishing preliminary links between household behavior and external actors. Between October 8th and 10th, repeated envelope placements and package movements were meticulously logged. September 21st patterns were confirmed, including the 7:16 envelope deposit, 7:22 newspaper arrival, 8:03 retrieval by the father, and mid-afternoon package rotation. The consistency of these actions, now verified by federal observation, elevated the level of concern and initiated a formal evidence handling protocol. All entries were documented with date, time, and spatial context, forming a comprehensive timeline of activity. At 11:32 hours on October 10th, the babysitter observed the mother leave the house carrying 2 envelopes simultaneously, a deviation from prior patterns. She recorded the route taken, noting pauses at the mailbox and the placement of 1 envelope in a public bench near the park, a location later confirmed by surveillance teams as a potential dead drop site. The second envelope remained inside the home, suggesting selective transmission or retention. This nuanced variation in behavior was incorporated into the FBI's internal analysis, establishing procedural linkage between household actions and external coordination. On October 11th, federal agents met with the babysitter to review collected logs, cross-reference known operational markers, and instruct her in maintaining consistency of observations without interaction or confrontation. They emphasized recording micro-events, noting environmental variables, and maintaining precise timestamps, ensuring that her observations could serve as admissible evidence in potential counterintelligence operations. The babysitter, now acting in concert with federal procedural guidance, continued to observe the household with heightened attention. Between 1400 hours and 1600 hours on October 11th, she documented repeated minor irregularities, a previously unnoticed signal from a car mirror, a slight envelope repositioning on the garden lion, and the presence of a bicycle leaning near the sidewalk for 10 minutes. Each anomaly was logged meticulously, providing a temporal map of activity. By October 12th, these entries were being cross-referenced with federal intelligence databases for pattern recognition, including matching observed vehicle movements, envelope placements, and external pedestrian activity against prior data from other surveillance operations. The babysitter's procedural diligence allowed federal agents to construct a comprehensive timeline of repeated actions, micro-adjustments, and environmental interactions. Between 1600 hours and 1700 hours on October 12th, the babysitter observed the father removing a package from a home's interior storage and depositing it in the trunk of a parked vehicle across the street. The action was performed precisely at 1619, with no deviation, corroborated by time-stamped federal surveillance photographs. This event prompted the initiation of formal evidence collection. Photographs, object description, and spatial orientation were logged for chain of custody integrity. Federal agents now viewed the babysitter not merely as a civilian observer, but as a key procedural informant capable of providing detailed, time-stamped records of household activity, critical for subsequent counterintelligence operations. Through these structured observations, the FBI confirmed the presence of repeated operational patterns, including consistent envelope placements, external vehicle coordination, and minor signaling behaviors, all of which were meticulously logged by the babysitter, forming the procedural foundation for escalation into active surveillance, analysis, and eventual confrontation. From 6:45 hours on Monday, October 16, 1978, federal surveillance operations expanded to include multiple observation points around the residence and along known transit routes previously documented by the babysitter. Surveillance teams established fixed positions in adjacent buildings, parked vehicles, and nearby sidewalks, equipped with cameras, binoculars, and recording devices, all coordinated through synchronized watches to maintain precise timestamps. Observation logs detailed the parents' every movement, departures and arrivals, steps taken along driveways, hand positioning during object handling, and any environmental interactions. Between 7:15 and 7:45 hours, the mother deposited a brown envelope in the garden lion, as previously documented, then departed in a sedan along a route monitored by federal units stationed at predetermined observation points. At 7:22 hours, a gray sedan arrived across the street, its driver remaining in the vehicle for exactly 6 minutes, observed by agents with binoculars and recorded in real time. The father departed at 7:30 hours, carrying a briefcase, following a path parallel to a pedestrian route observed for 3 days prior. Each movement was recorded with timestamp, location, and environmental context, including wind, temperature, and minor pedestrian interruptions. Between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock hours, agents coordinated to track the parents' mid-morning errands, confirming repeated visits to a post office branch 5 miles away and a nondescript office complex in the downtown area, consistent with prior anomalies documented by the babysitter. Vehicles and package movements were recorded with sequential timing: envelope removal, transport, deposit at secondary locations, and return. Each step was cross-referenced with prior logs to identify patterns indicative of structured intelligence activity. Between 11:15 and 12 o'clock hours, agents observed the mother meet a previously unidentified individual at a public park bench 3 blocks from the residence. The meeting lasted precisely 4 minutes, during which an envelope was exchanged and the individual departed on foot. Surveillance logs recorded height, approximate age, clothing details, and exact path of movement, corroborated by photographic evidence. The babysitter continued documenting microactions within the home, including repositioning of envelopes, adjustment of blinds, and minor interior movements by the child, providing internal verification of timing and sequence. From 13 to 1500 hours, the father returned to the residence with a small package, deposited temporarily inside the home, then departed again at 1417 hours. Agents documented each movement, ensuring chain of custody records were maintained for potential evidentiary use. Between 1530 and 1645 hours, surveillance units monitored external drop points previously identified by the babysitter, noting the arrival of a dark green pickup and a pedestrian in a long coat, both lingering for durations consistent with prior observations. Precise measurements were taken, vehicle distances from the curb, pedestrian proximity to designated markers, and time spent within the monitored radius. All observations were logged in real time, ensuring accurate cross-referencing with earlier data. At 1700 hours, the mother returned home, retrieved a small envelope from the garden lion, and deposited it into an interior safe, a deviation noted in the surveillance log for subsequent analysis. Federal agents compared these actions against historical data, confirming a pattern of repeated operational conduct over a 4-week period. The babysitter's logbook entries, aligned with federal observations, enabled reconstruction of a complete temporal map of daily activity. Envelope deposit at 7:16, newspaper arrival at 7:22, package retrieval at 8:03, and external exchanges at mid-morning intervals. Between 1730 and 1800 hours, surveillance units observed minors signaling behavior between the parents and a third party using hand placement, package positioning, and subtle gestures, indicating coordination with an unseen handler. The precise execution of movements, corroborated by time-stamped logs and photographic records, reinforced the classification of the household as an operational node within a covert intelligence network. Analysis continued into the following days, incorporating environmental variables, repeated actions, and micro-adjustments, including minor repositioning of objects and deliberate routing choices for vehicles and pedestrians. Agents documented every step, creating an operational map linking household activity to external handlers while noting the consistency of micro-behaviors over time. At 9:45 hours on October 18th, the FBI initiated controlled interception of a dead drop operation observed through the babysitter's prior logs. The mother departed with a small envelope at 9:47 hours, traveling on a monitored route, while the surveillance team coordinated secondary observation at the drop site. The envelope was intercepted by agents before external transfer, photographed, and analyzed. Contents included coded messages, numeric sequences, and foreign language notations, which were cataloged and submitted to federal cryptanalysis units. During the same interval, the babysitter recorded in real time repositioning of household packages, minor window adjustments, and the child's movements, all correlated with federal surveillance logs to maintain temporal integrity. From 11 to 12:30 hours, agents continued to map vehicle movements, pedestrian positions, and envelope placements, reconstructing a multi-node operational sequence linking the household to external contacts. This included cross-referencing recurring patterns, the 7:16 deposit, mid-morning exchanges, and afternoon package rotations. Detailed sketches, photographic evidence, and precise timestamps were cataloged for formal case files. Between 13:15 and 1500 hours on October 19th, agents observed the mother meet an unidentified individual in a parking lot 3 blocks from the residence. The interaction lasted 6 minutes, observed through long lenses with the exchange of a small envelope. Photographs, time-stamped notes, and spatial measurements were recorded. Surveillance confirmed that the individual departed along a route consistent with previously unidentified pedestrian patterns, corroborating ongoing intelligence linkage. The babysitter continued to log interior movements, window adjustments, and object rotations within the home, providing internal verification of external operational sequences. At 1600 hours, the father returned home, deposited a parcel in the living room for temporary storage, then retrieved it 10 minutes later, carrying it to the parked vehicle across the street. Federal logs captured the vehicle's license plate, exact departure route, and surrounding environmental details, including pedestrian traffic and minor street activity. Between 1700 hours and 1830 hours, federal agents coordinated observation of additional suspected drop points, recording subtle signaling, package positioning, and minor adjustments to environmental markers consistent with operational security protocols. All observations were logged with timestamps, environmental context, and photographic evidence, ensuring detailed procedural documentation. At 1900 hours, the babysitter provided a full debriefing to federal agents on the day's observations, correlating her internal logbook entries with external surveillance data. Entries included envelope movements, microadjustments, pedestrian observations, and temporal patterns, all recorded with precision and cross-referenced for continuity. By October 20th, federal analysis established operational profiles for both parents, linking repeated microactions, envelope placements, and external interactions to a partially identified external handler. Despite full procedural observation, the handler remained unobserved, indicating operational sophistication and maintaining a level of unresolved ambiguity characteristic of Cold War intelligence operations. The babysitter's records, integrated with federal surveillance data, formed the backbone of the procedural investigation. Microactions, timestamp anomalies, and environmental details created a comprehensive timeline of covert activity, enabling controlled interception, evidence collection, and eventual interrogation of the primary assets while preserving the ongoing mystery of the handler. Evidence logs, photographs, sketches, and timestamp notes were all cataloged, maintaining chain-of-custody protocols and providing a procedural framework for subsequent legal and intelligence proceedings. The FBI's methodology mirrored that of formal intelligence operations: identification of patterns, verification of anomalies, controlled interception, and detailed documentation, all anchored in the babysitter's meticulous civilian observation. Between 2000 hours and 2030 hours, as the household settled for the evening, federal agents concluded the day's operational analysis, integrating new observations into the timeline and confirming consistency with prior data. The procedural approach ensured that each movement, minor or major, was logged, time-stamped, and analyzed, creating a comprehensive, methodical record of activity leading to the eventual identification, apprehension, and interrogation of the primary assets while leaving the external handler unresolved, maintaining the tension and ambiguity emblematic of Cold War espionage operations. On Monday, October 23, 1978, at 6:50 hours, federal surveillance teams initiated a controlled operation to intercept the external handler identified through cumulative behavioral analysis, micro-observations from the babysitter, and corroborated surveillance logs. Observation posts were established at all potential rendezvous points previously identified, including public benches, alleys, and discrete park locations within a 2-block radius of the residence. Agents synchronized watches to maintain precise timestamp records and assign specific targets for each surveillance unit. The operational plan was constructed on 3 primary objectives: capture the external handler, intercept any ongoing intelligence exchanges, and document all movement sequences without alerting the household. At 7:12 hours, the mother exited the residence carrying a brown envelope, paused at the Garden Lion, then departed along the predetermined, monitored route. Surveillance logs recorded her movement, timing, and hand positioning, noting deviations of seconds from the established baseline. At 7:22 hours, the gray sedan previously observed on multiple occasions appeared across the street, its driver unknown and vehicle unregistered in local databases. Agents noted the duration of parking, direction of gaze, and minor adjustments to rear-view mirrors consistent with signaling behavior, while time-stamping every observable action to ensure accuracy in procedural documentation. Between 7:30 and 8 o'clock hours, the father departed with a small package, following a route parallel to pedestrian traffic identified in prior operations. Surveillance confirmed that both parents maintained consistent hand positioning, step sequencing, and micro-adjustments to objects, all correlating with previously documented patterns in the babysitter's detailed logs. At 8:15 hours, agents observe an unidentified figure emerge from a narrow alley approximately 4 blocks from the residence, pausing briefly near a lamppost before approaching a predetermined drop point in a park. The individual's movement corresponded temporally with the envelope departure from the residence, suggesting a direct operational link. Surveillance recorded approximate height, clothing, gait, and direction of movement, yet identification proved difficult due to obfuscation, including a wide-brimmed hat, gloves, and a coat designed to conceal distinguishing features. At 8:23 hours, as the individual approached the drop point, federal units attempted a controlled interception, advancing along parallel routes to converge on the subject without alerting the parents. Upon nearing the location, the handler detected the presence of surveillance and altered movement patterns, stepping into a crowd of mourning pedestrians and effectively disappearing from monitored zones. Attempts to track the subject visually and photographically were partially unsuccessful, leaving a critical element of the operation unresolved. Between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock hours, agents coordinated with the babysitter to confirm the completion of the parents' routine envelope and package movements. She documented the microactions observed in real time: rotation of the envelope in the lion statue, minor adjustment of blinds, and precise positioning of objects within the home. These entries were synchronized with federal logs to verify the sequence of actions during the failed interception. By 11:15 hours, analysis of vehicle movements revealed that the gray sedan had departed without stopping, while the previously observed dark green pickup appeared along a secondary route, remaining stationary for 7 minutes before continuing along a known drop corridor. Surveillance logs recorded every micromovement: wheel rotation, door position, minor hand gestures, and pedestrian presence, all correlated against the babysitter's interior observations. From 12 to 13:30 hours, federal agents conducted a detailed review of the morning's operation, analyzing timestamped logs, photographs, and sketches to reconstruct the handler's likely escape path. Observed deviations from established patterns suggested high operational awareness and sophistication, consistent with Cold War intelligence tradecraft. The inability to apprehend the handler underscored the complexity of covert operations embedded within routine domestic life. At 1400 hours, the babysitter continued internal observation, documenting subtle alterations in package positioning, window adjustments, and the child's placement during routine activities. Entries included precise timestamps, spatial coordinates, and environmental contexts such as lighting, wind, and ambient noise. The alignment of internal observations with external surveillance provided critical verification of timing and movement sequences despite the handler's escape. Between 1500 hours and 1600 hours, federal agents conducted interviews with the babysitter, documenting her cumulative logs and confirming consistency in micropatterns, object movements, and temporal sequences. Analysis of these interviews reinforced the operational understanding of the household as an active node in an intelligence network, while highlighting the handler's continued ability to avoid capture. At 16:30 hours, federal analysts identified the parents as primary assets within the network, confirming repeated envelope deposits, package retrievals, and signaling behaviors. The analysis included correlation of external pedestrian activity, vehicle placement, and deviations in timing indicative of adaptive operational responses. The babysitter's records proved instrumental in linking internal domestic microactions to broader intelligence movements. Between 1700 hours and 1830 hours, agents monitored post-operation behaviors, noting micro-adjustments to household objects, brief window openings, and minor repositioning of the garden lion envelope. Each movement was cataloged with exact timestamps, spatial coordinates, and environmental conditions, providing continuous procedural verification. Despite the absence of a handler, these observations allowed for partial mapping of operational flow, confirming prior assumptions regarding repeated routines and signaling protocols. On October 24th, sentencing procedures and formal operational closure for the parents commenced. Federal evidence included the babysitter's detailed logs, photographic documentation of envelope and package movements, surveillance logs, intercepted coded messages, and cryptanalysis of numeric sequences contained in recovered envelopes. Both parents were identified as active participants in covert intelligence exchanges, but due to the handler's disappearance and incomplete chain of custody verification for external contacts, federal prosecution focused on possession and facilitation of intelligence materials rather than direct espionage links to foreign operatives. The babysitter provided formal testimony regarding her observational methodology, including timestamps, microaction recording, and environmental annotations. Entries from her logbook, corroborated by surveillance photographs and cryptanalysis reports, formed the procedural backbone of federal legal proceedings, highlighting methodical evidence gathering without conjecture or dramatization. Between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock hours on October 25th, operational analysts conducted follow-up sweeps for the handler along secondary routes, previously documented drop points, and pedestrian corridors. No sightings occurred, suggesting successful evasion and reinforcing the handler's operational sophistication. Analysts noted repeated adherence to Cold War tradecraft, use of ordinary public spaces, timing of movements to coincide with civilian activity, and utilization of untraceable transport methods. By 1300 hours, the babysitter had resumed normal observation routines within the household, documenting minor alterations in object placement and envelope micromovements, maintaining procedural diligence even after federal intervention. These records provided ongoing verification of household behavior for intelligence assessment. Between 1400 hours and 1600 hours, final surveillance review confirmed pattern consistency with prior weeks. Envelope deposits at 7:16, retrieval by the father at 8:03, external pedestrian activity, and subtle signaling behaviors. The handler remained unidentified and unapprehended, leaving operational threads unresolved and reinforcing the persistent ambiguity characteristic of Cold War intelligence operations. By 1700 hours, federal analysts concluded the official operation, maintaining secure archives of all logbooks, photographs, time-stamped records, and procedural documentation. While the primary assets faced legal consequences, the handler's identity, location, and operational methodology remained unconfirmed. Post-operation review emphasized the limitations of observational and procedural methods when confronting highly skilled, partially invisible intelligence actors. Between 1800 hours and 2000 hours, the babysitter continued to log household activities in neutral, factual terms, documenting microactions, object placements, environmental variables, and temporal sequences. These ongoing records provided validation of procedural accuracy and ensured continuity for potential future operations. The case concluded with unresolved elements: the handler's escape, partially observed external contacts, and incomplete chain of custody for foreign communications. The operational narrative reinforced the tension between observation, evidence collection, and the inherent uncertainty of Cold War espionage. The babysitter's role, while civilian, demonstrated the capacity for meticulous observation to support formal intelligence procedures, bridging the gap between ordinary domestic routines and covert operational activity. Despite formal closure, unanswered questions persisted. The handler's identity, the full extent of operational networks, and potential external intelligence objectives remained unknown. The case highlighted the procedural methodology of surveillance, analysis, and controlled interception while illustrating the limitations imposed by invisible actors and civilian boundaries. Cold War ambiguity persisted, encapsulated in precise timestamps, recorded microactions, and observed behaviors that pointed to coordinated intelligence activity, yet left critical elements unresolved, leaving a residual tension emblematic of procedural intelligence work. The babysitter's meticulous logs, cross-referenced with federal surveillance, created a detailed temporal map of activity, yet the unseen handler's disappearance underscored the unresolved nature of espionage operations. The final reflection emphasized procedural rigor, the efficacy of meticulous civilian observation, and the persistent uncertainty of Cold War intelligence, highlighting the delicate interplay between domestic routine, operational activity, and unresolved espionage threads that would remain a matter of record, observation, and speculation for years to come, a testament to the quiet, methodical, and often unseen tension inherent in Cold War spycraft.